Cross-sectional study was explained briefly in our previous lecture. Let's take a closer look at the source of data which was gathered by a postal questionnaire. It should be noted that this is not the original questionnaire from the original paper, and questions here are simply made up for educational purpose. Let's say the questionnaire was started with general questions for gathering data such as age, gender, height, weight, and the level of education. And in some parts, more specific questions probably such as do you have depression, with the answer possible yes or no. Each of these questions represent at least one data item or variable. We can define variable as a characteristic, number, or quantity that can be measured or counted. Let's look at this question about depression and call this variable self-defined depression. And let's assume all 7,618 participants answered this question, and among them 884 replied as yes. To calculate the proportion of yes answers, we can simply divide 884 by total of 7,618, which tell us that 11.6% of the respondents are defined themselves as depressed. This proportion is called the prevalence. So the definition of prevalence is the proportion of a population who have a specific characteristic. By prevalence, we are measuring the status of a disease or condition. Cross-sectional study as a snapshot can give us the prevalence of a condition. Imagine this cross-sectional research was happened in 2015. And that time we have 6,734 participants that replied no to this question. And we contact them after 1 year in 2016 for the second time. Since they are contacted more than once, the study cannot be called cross-sectional anymore. Let's assume that all of 6,734 people who answered no in 2015 answered an upgraded questionnaire, and for self-defined depression, 137 answered yes this time. So they are new cases. If we check the proportion of new cases, it's 2%. Which means for 1 year, 2% of people without depression develop this condition. In epidemiology, we call it the incidence rate, the number of new cases per population at risk in which at a given time period. Pay attention that we use rate because a time period is included here. This kind of a study that a designated group of individuals are followed over a period of time is called cohort. Typically, a cohort is useful for estimating the risk of disease, calculating the incidence rate, and relative risk. That we are going to explain relative risk later. Here we can ask why. What was the risk factor or risk factors for happening new cases? Imagine in 2016, one of the new questions is, did your economic situation get worse compared to last year? Designing such questions led researchers to evaluate a possible risk factor as a hypothesis, in this case the economic situation, which caused depression. By the other word, the researcher wants to find out if depression depends on this risk factor. In this case, we have a dependent variable, depression, and we can call the risk factor the independent variable. We will explain those in cause and effect in the next lectures. So here, the cohort investigates the cause of disease and establishing link between risk factors and health outcomes.